There's a moment in every conflict when the narrative becomes as important as the missiles, when what each side says about the war starts to matter just as much as what each side does on the battlefield, because narratives shape public opinion. They move financial markets. They determine whether allies stay committed or start to waver, and they set the terms for how and whether the fighting eventually stops. We have reached that moment, and the contradiction at the center of this war has become so stark, so publicly visible, and so impossible to reconcile. The entire trajectory of the conflict now depends on which version of reality is true. On one side, US President has publicly stated that Iran is begging for a deal. He has claimed repeatedly that negotiations to end the war are underway, that progress is being made, that the operation is close to achieving its objectives, that Iran understands it cannot win and is looking for a way out. On the other side, Iran has categorically denied all of this. Tehran has stated that no negotiations have taken place. It has called the American ceasefire proposal one-sided and unfair. It has issued its own counter-demands that Washington has rejected. And it has framed US President's public claims about negotiations not as evidence of diplomacy. Instead, Iranian officials have characterized them as an admission that the war is not going the way Washington planned. Both of these narratives cannot be true at the same time. One side is constructing a version of events that does not reflect what is actually happening, and determining which side that is, based on the verified evidence from multiple international sources, is not just an academic exercise. It is the single most consequential question in this conflict right now, because the answer determines whether we are weeks away from a ceasefire or weeks away from a dramatic escalation that could reshape the Middle East for a generation. Let me lay out what each side is saying, what the independent evidence shows, and what the sources tell us about who is closer to the truth. Start with the American narrative. US President has made several public statements asserting that Iran wants to end the fighting. Al Jazeera's breaking coverage reported that US President claimed talks to end the war are ongoing. Al Jazeera separately reported US President stating that Iran is begging for a deal. The White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, stated according to Bloomberg's live blog that the administration is very close to meeting objectives of the Iran operation. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, meeting with G7 foreign ministers in France, told allies that the US expects the war to end in weeks, not months. This was reported by both the Associated Press and Fox News. Fox News reported that Rubio offered a new Iran war timeline prediction during his meetings with foreign leaders. This narrative paints a picture of a war that is going according to plan, a campaign that has achieved most of its goals, an adversary that is weakening, desperate, and ready to come to the table on American terms. If this narrative is accurate, then the conflict is nearing its conclusion, and the remaining military operations are essentially a mopping-up exercise. It is designed to pressure Tehran into finalizing an agreement. Now consider Iran's narrative. It is the opposite in virtually every dimension. The Associated Press reported that Iran dismissed the U.S. ceasefire plan and issued its own counterproposal. Bloomberg reported that the American 15-point plan, which included a demand that Iran dismantle its nuclear sites, was rejected outright. Bloomberg's reporting revealed that Iran's counter-demands included sovereign authority over the Strait of Hormuz and financial reparations. These are not the demands of a nation that is begging. These are maximalist positions from a government that believes it still has leverage. Al Jazeera reported that Iran's stated U.S. attacks while calling for talks are intolerable, and that its response remains undecided. Al Jazeera separately reported that Tehran vowed to extract a heavy price for Israeli strikes on 2 Iranian nuclear sites. An Iranian general, according to Fox News, threatened that Americans in parks and tourist spots will no longer be safe. Iran's foreign minister, according to Al Jazeera, stated that Iran's defense will continue as long as needed. These are not the statements of a government that is looking for an exit. These are the statements of a government that believes it can sustain the fight. So which narrative does the independent evidence support? Let's start with the question of whether negotiations are actually happening. Al Jazeera's editorial analysis addressed this directly with the headline, "US says they're talking, Iran says they're not. Who's telling the truth?" The analysis cited critics who argued that US President's claims about ongoing negotiations are a tactic. It is designed to calm volatile financial markets rather than reflect genuine diplomatic activity. And there is evidence to support that interpretation. The New York Times reported that oil prices dropped briefly whenever US President signaled eagerness to engage with Iran. This demonstrates how sensitive global energy markets have become to even the perception of de-escalation. Bloomberg reported a similar pattern, with stocks rising and oil falling whenever truce prospects were being weighed. This creates a powerful incentive for any president to publicly claim that talks are progressing, regardless of whether they actually are. Each such claim temporarily stabilizes markets that are hemorrhaging value. The Associated Press reported that after markets rattled, U.S. President once again punts on following through with threat on Iran power plants. Bloomberg reported that U.S. President pushed back his deadline for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. He extended it to April 6th, rather than following through with threatened strikes on Iranian power infrastructure. Bloomberg's analysis headlined this pattern as U.S. President extends energy attack pause, claims Iran talks ongoing. The extension of deadlines without follow-through, combined with public claims of progress that Iran denies, creates a specific pattern. It is a pattern that is more consistent with market management than with genuine diplomatic progress. But let's also examine the claim that Iran is desperate. If Iran were truly begging for a deal, you would expect to see certain things in the military and economic data. You would expect Iranian launch rates to be declining. You would expect the Strait of Hormuz to be reopening. You would expect Iranian public statements to be softening. You would expect back-channel communications to be leaking through intermediaries. The data shows the opposite on nearly every metric. According to Al Jazeera's updated live conflict tracker, the preliminary casualty figures have climbed. They now stand at approximately 1,937 people killed in Iran. At least 19 have died in Israel, 13 U.S. service members killed and 25 killed across Gulf states. Those numbers have increased every single week of this conflict. They are not stabilizing. They are accelerating. Bloomberg published a video analysis with the title, "Why Iran's Missiles Are Still Such a Threat After Weeks of War." Bloomberg separately reported that long-range missiles fired from hard-to-reach Iranian bases are taking a greater toll on coalition forces. The Pentagon, according to Bloomberg, is now seeking to shift funds toward interceptor systems. This is an implicit acknowledgement that Iranian launch rates are consuming American defensive resources faster than the original plan accounted for. The Associated Press published an analysis headlined, "1 month into war, Iran is using insurgent tactics and holding the world economy hostage." That does not describe a nation that is begging. It describes a nation that is fighting asymmetrically and imposing costs that accumulate over time. The Strait of Hormuz tells the same story. The Associated Press reported that Iran is now formalizing its chokehold on the strait with a toll booth regime. Tehran is deciding which ships pass, when they pass, and under what conditions. Bloomberg reported that 2 Chinese container ships attempted to exit the strait before making U-turns. Bloomberg reported that an Iran-hit Thai ship drifted ashore near Hormuz, with its crew still missing. Bloomberg's live blog stated that the strait remains largely closed, with a return to normal traffic unlikely while war is raging. Al Jazeera reported that Iran agreed to facilitate passage of humanitarian shipments at the United Nations request. But this is only humanitarian shipments, and only at Iran's discretion. A nation that is begging for a deal does not tighten its control over the world's most important oil choke point. It does not do this while simultaneously rejecting the other side's ceasefire terms. What Iran is doing with the Strait of Hormuz is the opposite of begging. It is leveraging. And the economic data confirms how effectively that leverage is working. Bloomberg reported that Macquarie, the major investment bank, warned to brace for $200 oil if war lasts until June. Bloomberg reported that the Nasdaq 100 fell into correction territory. The New York Times reported that stocks have posted their 5th consecutive weekly loss, the worst losing streak in roughly 4 years. The S&P 500 is now down nearly 9% from its January high. Bloomberg reported that Treasury yields reached the year's highest levels as the Iran stalemate lifted oil prices further. Bloomberg reported that the European Union sees a risk of stagflation shock from the Iran war. The European Central Bank's Pierre Wunsch stated that a rate hike is likely if war isn't over by June. Economists surveyed by Bloomberg see the war pushing U.S. inflation above 3% while hurting growth. Bloomberg reported that Carnival Cruise Lines cut its profit outlook because of rising fuel costs. The New York Times reported that diesel is now a bigger problem for consumers than gasoline. The Associated Press reported that the war has sparked a global fertilizer shortage threatening food prices worldwide. The New York Times described a dangerous bottleneck in the Strait of Hormuz, putting global food supply chains at risk. India slapped taxes on fuel exports as the war jolted its supply chains. Iran shifted its own grain imports to the Gulf of Oman because Hormuz traffic is locked up. Bloomberg reported that California diesel prices topped $7 a gallon, an all-time record. The Associated Press reported that Southeast Asian nations are revisiting nuclear power plants because the war has disrupted their energy supplies. Al Jazeera reported that UNICEF said the Iran war means more children will suffer in Somalia. Al Jazeera described this situation as the worst trade rupture in 80 years. This is the world that Iran's strategy is creating. The question is not whether Iran is suffering. It clearly is, with nearly 2,000 people killed and its infrastructure sustaining enormous damage. The question is whether Iran's leadership believes the costs it is imposing are sufficient to outlast Washington's willingness to continue. And on that question, the evidence suggests that Tehran believes the answer is yes. Bloomberg's weekend interview was headlined, Israel's war with Iran will end when U.S. President says stop. That framing implies that the limiting factor in this conflict is not Iran's capacity to endure, but America's willingness to continue. Bloomberg's March 14th weekend newsletter was headlined, U.S. President's quick war in Iran is turning into a test of endurance. It noted that Tehran's remaining leadership is betting on the long game. By March 21st, Bloomberg followed with, U.S. President's short wars have a way of circling back. It noted that war without entanglement may not exist. Bloomberg reported that economist Nouriel Roubini sees the U.S. as more likely to escalate in Iran than back down. That assessment contradicts the idea that a deal is imminent. It suggests that the next phase of this conflict could involve intensification, not resolution. The domestic political landscape inside the United States adds another layer of complexity to this question. The Associated Press published results of a new AP-NORC poll showing that most Americans believe U.S. military action against Iran has gone too far. The Associated Press separately reported that older and younger conservatives at CPAC are split over U.S. President's war in Iran. Fox News reported that some Republicans are raising questions about the war plans. Fox News also published a poll showing sour voters who say Washington is out of touch. Bloomberg reported that some Republicans are raising questions about the direction of the campaign. This is significant because domestic political pressure is one of the mechanisms through which Iran's strategy works. Tehran does not need to defeat the American military on the battlefield. It needs to sustain the fight long enough for the economic costs to erode American political support for the war. The polling data suggests that erosion is already underway. On the military front, the costs continue to mount on both sides. CENTCOM confirmed the loss of a KC-135 aerial refueling tanker over Iraq on March 12th. All crew members were confirmed deceased by March 14th. 3 U.S. F-15s were involved in a friendly fire incident in Kuwait. All pilots survived. CENTCOM published a statement on March 26th regarding a non-combat related injury aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln. This confirmed that a second carrier strike group is now operating in the theater. Fox News reported that over 90% of Iranian missiles have been intercepted. But they also warned that a critical vulnerability in the defensive architecture is growing. This happens as Iran adapts its targeting patterns. Al Jazeera reported on Iran's cluster munitions penetrating Israeli air defense systems. Al Jazeera examined whether Iran may have brought down a U.S. F-35 stealth fighter, a claim not confirmed by the Pentagon. Al Jazeera reported that Tehran vowed to extract a heavy price for Israeli strikes on 2 nuclear sites. The IAEA warned of a major radiological accident if an Iranian nuclear plant is damaged. Fox News reported that the race against time to address Iran's nuclear weapons program is intensifying amid fresh strikes. The G7 foreign ministers met in France with the war dominating the agenda. The Associated Press reported that Rubio tried to sell the U.S. strategy to skeptical allies insulted by U.S. President. Al Jazeera reported that U.S. diplomat Marco Rubio denounced settler violence and tolls in the Hormuz Strait during the meeting. Al Jazeera reported that Iran applauded Germany's president for publicly stating that the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran violates international law. This is a fracture within the Western alliance that Tehran is actively exploiting. Reuters reported that U.S. President's Board of Peace presented Hamas with a detailed disarmament plan. It required the group to lay down weapons in stages over 8 months. It also allowed the destruction of its vast Gaza tunnel network. Hamas has refused. Reuters reported that the Gaza ceasefire remains under severe strain since the U.S. and Israel began bombing Iran. The interconnected nature of these conflicts means that the collapse of the Iran diplomatic track destabilizes every other negotiation in the region. So let me bring this back to the central question. Who is telling the truth? The evidence from Bloomberg, the Associated Press, the New York Times, Al Jazeera, Fox News, CENTCOM, and Reuters points to a specific situation. It is far more consistent with Iran's narrative than with Washington's. Iran is not begging. It is fighting an asymmetric war designed to impose unsustainable costs over time. It is controlling the Strait of Hormuz. It is launching missiles from dispersed, hard-to-reach facilities. It is rejecting the American ceasefire plan while issuing maximalist counterdemands. It is watching American polling numbers shift against the war. And it is betting that time is on its side. That does not mean Iran is winning in any conventional sense. Nearly 2,000 of its people have been killed. Its energy infrastructure is being systematically targeted. Its economy is under extraordinary strain. 2 of its nuclear sites have been struck. But the strategic framework Tehran built, dispersed missiles, asymmetric tactics, Hormuz control, and the weaponization of global economic interdependence, was designed for exactly this scenario. It was designed to absorb punishment while making the war too expensive, too disruptive, and too politically costly for the other side to sustain indefinitely. U.S. President's claims about Iran begging may serve a domestic and market-calming purpose. The temporary drops in oil prices that follow each such statement provide measurable evidence of that effect. But the military evidence, the economic evidence, the diplomatic evidence, and the polling evidence all suggest that this war is not approaching a negotiated conclusion. It is approaching a decision point, one where the United States must choose between escalation that carries enormous risks and an off-ramp. This escalation includes the IAEA's warning about radiological catastrophe. The off-ramp may require accepting terms far less favorable than what the 15-point plan demanded. The war depends on who is telling the truth. And right now, the verified evidence from every major international source suggests that the truth lies much closer to what is happening on the water. It lies closer to the markets and at the launch sites than to what is being said at the podium. Every claim in this video is sourced from official U.S. Central Command press releases. It is backed by verified reporting from Bloomberg, the Associated Press, Reuters, the New York Times, Fox News, and Al Jazeera. All source links are in the description below. If this helped you cut through the competing narratives and understand what the evidence actually shows, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This conflict is moving fast, and every day brings developments that could shift the entire picture. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and I will see you in the next one.